Imagine stepping out of your house today to worship a god whose name was first carved into stone like 4.5 millennia ago.
Which is just a wild concept.
Right. For you or for me, that sounds like a total thought experiment. But for millions of people in South Asia, that isn't a thought experiment at all.
No, it's just a Tuesday morning.
Exactly. Usually when we look back at ancient history, we're studying a museum piece. You brush the sand off a ruin in Egypt, or you unearth a ziggurat in Mesopotamia, and it's a closed chapter.
It's dead. It's buried.
Yeah, there's a very clear boundary between then and now. But when you step into the world of ancient South Asia, that whole museum display case just shatters completely. We are looking at a historical landscape that is literally still breathing.
It's the absolute definition of lining history. There's no glass case here at all.
Right.
The ancient past isn't something they, visit on a weekend trip to a ruin. It's the actual social and spiritual architecture of their daily lives.
And that is our mission today. We are taking a deep dive into the ultimate shortcut for understanding one of the world's most enduring, profoundly complex civilizations, ancient India.
Which is a huge topic.
It is. So, for you listening, if you want to know how a society builds a foundation that outlasts the pharaohs, outlasts Sumer, and is still actively shaping the modern world, you are in the right place.
Absolutely.
We're drawing our structural framework today from the brilliant historical synthesis by J.M. Roberts and Odd Arnwestad. Specifically, we're looking at their work in the Penguin History of the World.
It's a really phenomenal foundation.
It is, because it strips away the noise. It looks at the deep, slow-moving currents of human history.
Which really forces us to look at this history differently. I mean, we aren't just doing a roll call of dates and kings and battles.
Because those are kind of ephemeral.
Yeah, exactly. They fade. We are examining what the authors best describe as the digestive power of a culture.
The digestive power. I just love that. It's such a visceral concept.
It really is.
It's this idea that over thousands of years, this incredibly insulated subcontinent managed to absorb, adapt to, and ultimately transform like every single outside force it encountered.
It didn't just survive invasions or new ideas, it metabolized them.
Right, it used them as fuel. It used them to create the world's longest surviving social and religious systems.
Exactly. But to understand that digestive power, to understand how a civilization becomes that resilient, we have to start with the physical room they lives in.
The geography.
Geography is destiny, and nowhere on Earth is that truer than in South Asia.
You simply cannot grasp this history without looking at the borders. And, when we say borders, we aren't talking about invisible lines drawn on a map by politicians.
No, not at all.
We are talking about colossal, continent-defining physical barriers. The Indian subcontinent is roughly the size of Europe, but it functions like a massive walled garden.
A very heavily fortified garden.
Right. To the north and the northwest, you have the highest mountain ranges on the planet, the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush.
And then to the east, you have these incredibly dense, virtually impenetrable belts of jungle.
Yeah, and to the south, the massive, isolating expanse of the Indian Ocean.
So it is a naturally defined, continent-sized fortress. And that physical isolation restricted and channeled communication with the outside world for millennia.
Really, right up until the 16th and 17th centuries.
Right, when global maritime trade finally bridged the oceans. Until then, this was a profoundly insulated world.
But those walls, they do a lot more than just keep people out. They completely dictate the climate.
Yes, and that climate is the engine of the entire civilization.
Right, because much of India doesn't actually lie in the geographical tropics, but the climate is undeniably tropical.
And the mechanics of why that happens are just fascinating.
Okay, let's unpack this. How does that work?
Well, those massive northern mountains act as a literal shield.
Yeah.
They completely block the freezing, icy winds of Central Asia from sweeping down into the plains.
Wow, okay, so it's like a giant thermal wall.
Exactly. While simultaneously acting as a trap for the weather systems coming from the south.
Right, the oceans.
Yeah. The long southern coasts are wide open to the Indian Ocean. So when the heavy, rain-laden clouds roll in, they sweep across the subcontinent until they slam into that Himalayan wall.
Because they can't go any higher?
Right. They can't go any further north, so they just dump all that moisture right onto the land.
The annual monsoon.
The climatic clock of South Asia.
It's everything to them, isn't it?
It is. Arriving during the hottest months of the year, it's the central prop of their entire agricultural economy. If the monsoon is weak, empires starve.
And if it's strong, they thrive.
Exactly. It is the inescapable rhythm of life.
So we have this colossal, lush, walled garden. It's huge. It's ferociously fertile because of the monsoon, and it's completely walled off by mountains, jungles, and oceans.
But, and this is a big but,
Right. This is the hinge upon which all of Indian history swings. There is one crucial exception. There is a crack in the armor.
the northwestern frontier. Baluchistan and the mountain passes.
Right. It's essentially an incredibly busy back gate to the walled garden. If you wanted in for thousands of years, you had to go through that one specific gate.
And the implications of having a walled garden with only one door are profound. It totally changes the psychology and stability of a culture.
Give us an analogy, like compared to where?
Think about Mesopotamia. If you are sitting in the plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers,
Yeah.
you are completely exposed.
Right. There are no walls there.
None. You are in the crosshairs of multi-front invasions constantly. Anyone can walk in from the north, south, east, or west.
So you're constantly being disrupted. Your cities are burned. Your culture is rewritten.
Exactly. You never get a moment to catch your breath. But in India, without that constant omnidirectional threat, the civilization has the breathing room to establish incredibly deep roots.
Because when change does come, when invaders or new ideas arrive, they trickle in through that one northwestern gate.
And that bottleneck slows them down. It allows the massive established culture inside the garden the time, and really the mass, to absorb them, rather than be obliterated by them.
It creates a unique type of cultural conservatism. The roots go so deep that anything new is just, well, grafted onto the existing tree.
That's a perfect way to put it. And we see the timeline of this play out physically.
Right. Agriculture actually arrived in this region later than it did in the Middle East.
Yeah, farming is traced in that northwestern gate area, Baluchistan, to around 6000 BC.
Which is quite a bit later than Sumer or Egypt. But because of this incredible geography, this massive protected tropical incubator,
Right.
once agriculture finally took hold and these early farmers pushed through that back gate and hit the rich alluvial plains of the Indus River Valley, the compounding effects are explosive.
It is one of the most stunning, rapid developments in human history, the Harappan phenomenon.
Around 2600 BC, this cultural explosion just occurs. The Indus Valley civilization, often called Harappan after one of its major sites, doesn't just slowly emerge as a few scattered villages.
No, it erupts. It becomes an interconnected system covering over 250,000 square miles.
Let that number sink in for you guys listening. 250,000 square miles.
It's vastly larger than the Sumerian civilization.
Wow.
It is larger than the Egyptian civilization of the exact same era.
It's hard to even wrap your head around 250,000 square miles of unified urban planning, especially existing at a time when much of the world was still figuring out basic stone tools.
Yeah, it's staggering.
And at the heart of this massive area are these sprawling megacities. You have Harappa on the Ravi River and Mohenjo-Daro on the Indus River. We're talking about populations exceeding 30,000 people in a single city.
And this wasn't just an organic, chaotic sprawl either.
Right. These weren't just big shanty towns.
Not at all. These cities demonstrate a level of administrative and organizational skill that absolutely rivals and in many ways exceeds anything happening in Egypt or Mesopotamia at the time.
Now, I want to talk about the foundational technology that made all of this possible. Because when you look at how a society masters its environment, there's always a linchpin.
Oh, absolutely.
And it wasn't some new weapon, it wasn't a chariot, it was, remarkably, the burnt brick.
The humble burnt brick. It sounds so mundane, but it fundamentally altered the course of human development in that region.
So why is a burnt brick the catalyst for an entire civilization?
Well, there's a massive vulnerability to building a society reliant on a single massive river.
Right, water.
Mesopotamia had bricks, sure, but they used sun-baked mud bricks. If you build a massive city out of sun-baked mud next to the mighty Indus River, water is your ultimate enemy.
Because the Indus is violent, its floods are devastating.
Exactly. The first major flood comes along and your entire mud brick city literally dissolves back into the earth. It melts.
It just washes away.
Right. You cannot tame a major river system and build permanent monumental infrastructure on a flat floodplain completely lacking in natural stone if all you have is mud.
So the invention of the burnt brick baking the clay in a high-temperature kiln changes everything.
It changes the chemistry of the material, it vitrifies the clay, it makes it waterproof.
That single technological leap gave them the infrastructure they needed to control the floods channel the water, and build permanent cities.
And the sheer scale of what they built with those bricks is mind-boggling.
Yeah, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were massive, 2 to 2.5 miles in circumference.
And they had standardized brick sizes across this entire 250,000 square mile area.
Wait, standardized bricks across that huge of an area.
Yes, that implies an incredibly powerful centralized authority or a deeply ingrained shared culture.
They had rectangular grid layouts for their streets. They were doing complex urban planning in 2600 BC.
They built massive granaries to store the wealth of their agriculture, too.
And we can't forget an absolute obsession with plumbing.
Ah, yes, the plumbing.
This is the detail everyone remembers about the Harappans. In some streets of Harappa, nearly every single house had a bathroom.
They had elaborate covered drainage systems running right under the streets.
Which is astonishing when you consider that major European cities didn't have functional indoor plumbing or covered sewers well into the 19th century.
It really puts things into perspective. But we have to look deeper at why they were so obsessed with plumbing.
Because it likely wasn't just an early understanding of municipal hygiene, right?
Precisely. In the ancient world, physical cleanliness is almost always tied to spiritual purity.
Okay, so it was religious.
Yes. We are likely looking at the earliest physical manifestation of something profoundly cultural and religious. In these ancient kiln-fired brick bathrooms, we see the very first traces of ritual ablutions.
The sacred bathing.
Exactly. The sacred bathing that is still absolutely vital to Hindu practice today.
So millions of people stepping into the Ganges today are participating in a concept of water-based spiritual purification that was institutionalized in Mohenjo-Daro 4,500 years ago.
There's that living history we talked about. The museum case is totally shattered.
And this civilization wasn't just looking inward at its own bathrooms either. They were a global economic powerhouse. Look at a site like Lothal, about 400 miles south of Mohenjo-Daro.
Lothal is a marvel of ancient engineering.
They built a massive dockyard, and to make it work, they connected it to the sea with a canal that was a mile long.
They engineered this massive basin with a tidal lock in 2600 BC, just to handle the massive tidal fluctuations of the region.
And they were using this port to export goods all over the ancient world. They exported the world's first known cotton cloth.
Which is a huge deal.
Right. They would wrap bales of goods in this cotton, seal the cordage with clay seals, and sail these ships through the Persian Gulf all the way to Mesopotamia.
And we actually have the corroborating evidence from the other side.
The Mesopotamian records, right.
Yes, the Akkadian records of Sargon I in Mesopotamia explicitly logged trade contacts with a place they called Maluha.
And what were they bringing in?
They were bringing in lapis lazuli, carnelian, and cotton. Scholars are highly confident Maluha was the Mesopotamian name for the Indus Valley civilization.
So you have this thriving, highly organized, globally connected trading empire. But sitting right at the center of it is this haunting mystery.
The scripts.
Yeah, we have about 2,500 surviving Harappan seals. Beautiful little intricately carved squares, usually depicting animals, elephants, tigers, rhinos, and that famous unicorn-like bull.
We know the script reads from right to left.
And there are theories that the animals might represent the 6 seasons of their year, but we cannot read a single syllable of it.
It's the great silence of the ancient world. Without a bilingual text like the Rosetta Stone, it remains a locked door.
So frustrating.
It is. There are strong linguistic hypotheses that the language might be structurally related to the Dravidian tongues still spoken in southern India today, but we just can't prove it.
So we know the exact dimensions of their bricks. We know how their sewers worked, we know they took baths, but we don't know what they called their gods, their kings, or even what they called themselves.
Which makes the sudden end of this civilization feel almost incredibly eerie.
It really does, because we go from the height of this literate, organized urban glory to a dark, abrupt collapse.
Yeah, around 1750 BC, this entire sprawling society just fractures and crumbles.
Skeletons were found lying right in the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, unburied, left exactly where they fell.
It paints a picture of a sudden, catastrophic, apocalyptic end.
And coinciding almost perfectly with this decline, around 1750 DC, is the arrival of a new group of people coming through that northwestern gate, the Aryans.
Now, to be precise, we have to mention that Aryan is a linguistic designation.
Right, it's an Indo-European language group moving in from the Hindu Kush Mountains.
Yes, but culturally, they were the polar opposite of the Harappans. They were nomadic warriors, they brought bronze weapons, horse-drawn chariots, and a deeply patriarchal martial culture.
So for a long time, historians looked at those two data points, unburied skeletons in the streets and the arrival of chariot-riding warriors, and drew the obvious dramatic conclusion.
The classic invasion narrative.
Right. The warlike nomads sweep down from the mountains, slaughter the peaceful, bath-taking city dwellers, and burn the civilization to the ground.
It's a compelling story, but modern archaeology and historical analysis have completely dismantled it.
Wait, really? So they didn't conquer them?
No, there is simply no evidence of a continent-wide systemic military annihilation. The Aryans didn't destroy the Indus Valley civilization.
So what kills 250,000 square miles of highly organized civilization? If it wasn't chariots, what was it?
It was almost certainly environmental collapse.
Wow.
The very environment that allowed them to boom became their undoing. The delicate agricultural balance that fed those 30,000-person megacities was wrecked.
How so?
We see evidence of devastating, unpredictable floods and massive tectonic shifts that actually altered the courses of the major river systems.
Oh man, if your entire city's hydrology, your canals, your docks, your agriculture is perfectly calibrated to a river, and that river moves 5 miles to the east?
You're dead. You're completely stranded.
But it wasn't just natural tectonic bad luck, was it?
No. There is a deeply tragic irony built into their foundational technology. The burnt brick.
Oh, this is the part that is so fascinating and horrifying. Unpack this for us.
Think about the thermodynamics of baking millions and millions of bricks to build cities of that scale.
It takes a lot of heat.
Exactly. Kilns require massive, constant amounts of fuel. And in the ancient world, that fuel is wood.
Right.
To build their waterproof cities, they had to systematically deforest their entire surrounding environment over centuries.
So they clear-cut the forests to bake the bricks.
And when you remove the forests, you destroy the root systems holding the topsoil together.
Which exacerbates the flooding because the land can no longer absorb the monsoon rains.
Exactly. The soil erodes, the agricultural yields plummet, and the ecosystem collapses. They literally engineered their own demise to build their indestructible cities.
Wow, that is such a profound lesson. So when the Aryans finally arrived through the mountain passes in 1750 BC, they aren't conquering a thriving superpower.
Not at all. They are walking into an ecological post-apocalypse.
They are encountering a scattered, starving, deeply traumatized population living in the dying remnants of these once great cities.
Which completely changes the dynamic of the encounter. This isn't an annihilation. It's the first great instance of that digestive power in action.
Okay, how so?
Well, the Aryans had military superiority, certainly. But they didn't wipe out the indigenous population. They settled down among them.
And over centuries, a slow, incredibly complex cultural fusion took place.
Yes, the native populations kept their deep-rooted beliefs and local practices alive and slowly merged with the newcomers.
But the immediate aftermath of this collapse is pretty grim, because culturally, in terms of infrastructure and administration, the Aryans were vastly less advanced than the Harappans.
They didn't build cities. They didn't have complex plumbing.
And most devastatingly, they didn't have writing. The Harappan script vanishes. Writing completely disappears from the subcontinent.
India plunges into a sort of dark age.
The Aryans have to slowly transition from being pastoral nomads, wandering with their cattle, into settled village-based farmers, which is a process that takes hundreds of years.
And because writing vanishes, our entire window into this massive transitional era, the formation of the society that will become India, relies on a completely different technology of memory.
The spoken word.
Yes.
And this brings us to the Rig Veda. Here's where it gets really interesting. This is an astonishing human achievement.
Truly is.
It's a collection of over 1,000 incredibly complex, poetic, sacrificial hymns that the Aryans brought with them and continued to develop.
These hymns were the core of their reality.
They centered on their gods, right? Like Agni, the god of fire, who was vital because the sacrificial flame was the literal messenger carrying offerings to the gods.
Right. And Varuna, the god of the heavens and cosmic justice.
And Indra, the great warrior god, the dragon slayer.
But look at Indra's primary function in the mythology. He is the warrior god, yes, but his most important mythological act is slaying the dragon Vritra to release the monsoon rains.
Oh, wow. So even the imported gods of these nomadic invaders are immediately subordinated to the climatic reality of the walled garden?
Exactly. The monsoon dictates everything.
But the mechanics of how the Rig Veda survived is what truly blows my mind. This massive collection of over 1,000 hymns was compiled around 1000 BC, but it was not written down until after AD 1300.
Over 2,000 years. Let that sit with you.
Over 2 millennia of transmitting an incredibly dense philosophical corpus entirely by word of mouth from generation to generation without a single written text to check your work against.
And it wasn't like a game of telephone where the story changes every time it's told.
Yeah.
The historical consensus is that it survived almost completely uncorrupted from its original form.
How is that even possible? How do you do that?
You have to understand why they memorized it. These weren't just stories around a campfire. To the Aryans, these hymns were literal acoustic magic.
Acoustic magic. I love that phrasing. So they believed the universe was sustained by the sacrifice, and the sacrifice was only valid if the hymn was pronounced with absolute, flawless, phonetic precision.
If you get one syllable wrong, the sun might not rise. The monsoon might fail.
The stakes were cosmic.
So the memorization techniques were astonishingly rigorous. They used complex mnemonic locks, learning the verses forward, backward, and in specific mathematical sequences.
That's insane. So if a syllable was missing, it would instantly break the mathematical meter of the chant.
Precisely. It required a staggering, almost unimaginable level of cultural discipline.
And if the survival of the universe depends on the flawless execution of these verbal codes, the people who hold those codes become incredibly powerful.
Exactly. This leads to the rise of the Brahmins, the priest class. Because they controlled these highly complex, mathematically exact rituals, they acquired supreme, unassailable power in the society.
They essentially became the human hard drives of the entire civilization.
That's a great way to put it.
Which naturally leads us to the origins of the social system we mentioned at the very beginning, the system that still shapes millions of lives today, the caste system.
We have to look at the text carefully here to understand how it evolved.
Right, looking at the historical evolution as detailed in Roberts and Westad, the root of this system appears to be a very standard, almost universal recognition of functional class divisions in any settling agricultural society.
Right. Initially, we were talking about varnas, or broad classes.
Yeah.
Early Aryan society divided naturally into three groups based on labor.
You had the Kshatriyas, the warrior aristocracy who ruled and fought.
You had the Brahmins, the priests who memorized the Vedas and performed the cosmic rituals.
And you had the Vaishyas, who were the ordinary peasant farmers and artisans.
And it's crucial to understand that in these early days, these were not inescapable genetic barriers. Movement between these functional classes was possible. It was a fluid division of labor.
But then, as the Aryans fully encountered and subjugated the indigenous non-Aryan populations, a fourth category is added, the Shudras.
The cultivators, the laborers. And this addition is where the flexibility ends.
Why is that?
Because this division was fundamentally about preserving the ethnic and ritual purity of the Aryans. The Shudras were considered ritually unclean. They were explicitly forbidden from studying or even listening to the Vedic hymns.
So the barrier goes up.
The barrier goes firmly up.
And over centuries, as society grows more complex, that barrier hardens into concrete. The Brahmins play a crucial role in elaborating this system. Those four massive categories splinter.
As new professions arise, they become new isolated groups, landowners separate from merchants. Eating taboos are codified. Marriage taboos are strictly enforced.
And this evolution brings us to the concept of jatis. We often translate caste as one massive monolithic thing, but the reality on the ground is the jati, thousands and thousands of hyper-local, deeply rigid subcastes.
Let's explain the mechanics of a jati because it dictates everyday reality.
Yeah, please do.
Your jati isn't just a social club. It dictates exactly who you can marry. That's endogamy.
Right.
It dictates exactly who can cook your food and who you can sit down to eat with, commensality. And it dictates exactly what craft or profession you are allowed to practice.
You are locked into an incredibly specific grid of social coordinates from birth to death.
And if we pull back and look at the macro-level political implications of this, it is profound.
Because of these incredibly strict rules regulating every microscopic aspect of daily life, the caste system, the jati network, became the primary regulator of Indian society.
It becomes more powerful than the state.
Far more powerful. Kings come and go, empires rise, they fall, capitals are sacked, but the jati remains.
The state didn't need to regulate your daily life because your jati already did. For millions of people, down to the present day, it was the only significant regulatory structure they ever interacted with.
Formal political institutions were entirely secondary to this deeply ingrained, self-policing social framework.
So we have this deeply rooted, highly structured society growing in the Punjab and the Indus region.
But human societies don't stay still. And around 1000 BC, we hit a massive inflection point. Two major technological catalysts forced the entire center of gravity of ancient India to shift eastward.
They moved from the Indus River system, pushing deeper into the walled garden, toward the massive Ganges River Valley.
And the first technological catalyst is iron. Iron arrives in India after 1000 BC. Now, why does switching from bronze to iron actually reorganize the civilization?
Think about the topography to the east. The Ganges Valley wasn't open farmland. It was covered in incredibly dense, ancient hardwood jungles.
Okay, so a lot of trees.
Right. If you take a bronze axe and try to chop down a prehistoric hardwood jungle, the bronze is going to dull, bend, and break.
Because bronze is an alloy. It's expensive, it requires tin and copper, and it's relatively soft.
Exactly. You cannot mass-produce enough bronze tools to clear a subcontinent.
But clearing a jungle requires tools. And that's where the narrative literally strikes iron.
Iron ore is abundant. Once you master the much higher temperatures required to smelt it, you can mass-produce cheap, incredibly durable iron axes and iron plows.
So iron implements allowed them to physically shatter the jungle?
They clear the thick eastern forests of the Ganges Valley and transform them into arable land.
Which perfectly sets up the second massive catalyst, rice. The cultivation of rice in this newly cleared, incredibly fertile, monsoon-drenched Ganges Valley changes the math of human survival.
The caloric math is everything. Rice supports a vastly higher caloric yield per acre than the wheat or barley they were growing back in the Indus Valley.
So a rice paddy can feed significantly more people on less land.
And more food immediately equals more people. You get a massive compounding population boom.
The Ganges Valley becomes the great demographic center of India. And when you have massive populations clustered together, supported by enormous agricultural surpluses, what happens?
The city returns.
Yes. We see a second age of Indian cities emerging by the 7th century BC.
But these are different from Harappa. They aren't just administrative centers, they are bustling marketplaces.
They are centers of specialized manufacturing, bringing artisans and guilds together.
And politically, everything scales up dramatically. You cannot maintain a small tribal chiefdom when you have massive race surpluses, booming populations, and the rise of new military technologies.
Specifically, the weaponization of the elephant.
Right.
When kings start fielding armies of war elephants, you need massive tax revenues and immense logistical networks to support them.
The environment and the technology favored the consolidation of much larger political units. By the end of the 7th century BC, northern India was organized into 16 major kingdoms and republics.
And one of them, the Kingdom of Maga, located in southern Bihar, emerges as the preponderant power.
It controls the iron mines, it controls the river trade, and it becomes the core of the first true historical empires of India.
This eastward shift is also the historical bedrock for the cultural identity of India. This era, in these Ganges kingdoms, is where the great Indian epics are born. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata.
These massive, sprawling epics that were constantly revised and expanded from roughly 400 BC all the way to AD 400 before finally being locked into written text.
They provided the shared mythological and moral vocabulary for the civilization. The Ganges Valley completely solidifies as the seat of empire. It becomes Hindustan.
But we need to pause right here. Because in our narrative, and honestly in most historical narratives, there is a massive blind spot.
Yeah, we've only been talking about the north. Everything, the Indus Valley, the Aryans, the Iron, the Ganges kingdoms is happening in the upper half of the subcontinent.
The southern counter-narrative gets constantly overshadowed. And there is a very physical reason for that northern bias in the history books.
Geography strikes again, doesn't it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the geography dictates everything. The Deccan Plateau and the entire southern peninsula were physically cut off from the northern plains by the Vindhya Mountains.
And these weren't just mountains. They were densely covered in hostile jungles. So that massive cultural and military engine of the Aryans, moving eastward and conquering the Ganges.
It just hits a wall, it hits the Vindhya Range, and it stops.
Or at the very least, it is drastically slowed down. The isolation was profound, and the greatest proof of this persistent isolation is linguistic.
The Dravidian languages survived entirely intact in the south, completely distinct from the Indo-European Sanskrit spreading across the north.
And they were operating on a completely different technological timeline. Archaeology shows that southern settlements contemporaneous with Harappa, going all the way back to 2600 BC, were domesticating cattle and goats, but they showed absolutely no trace of metal.
Right. Bronze and copper don't even begin to appear in the south until after the Aryans had already arrived in the north. The cultural lag is immense.
So how does the South develop differently?
Look at the topography. The north has the massive, flat, unbroken plains of the Ganges, perfect for chariots, elephants, and massive unified empires.
But the south is broken. It's hilly, fragmented, divided by deep river valleys.
This terrain simply did not favor the building of massive agrarian empires. You couldn't easily unify it by force.
So if you aren't building a massive land empire, what do? Well, you have two choices.
The interior peoples, protected by their inaccessibility in the hills, persisted in tribal hunter-gatherer cultures for a very long time.
But the people on the coasts, sitting on those massive, expansive coastlines, they turn their attention outward. They look to the sea.
The South developed a profound maritime focus, engaging in oceanic trade networks long before the North cared about the oceans.
It's a fascinating dichotomy, the agrarian, inward-looking land empires of the North versus the fragmented, outward-looking maritime networks of the South.
But eventually, a unifying thread does begin to weave this entire massive subcontinent together. And crucially, it isn't a political empire.
It isn't a single conquering king, it's religion.
Yes, religion.
By 400 BC, we are looking at an Indian population of roughly 25 million people. That is a quarter of the entire population of the globe at that time.
And what ties this massive, diverse group of people together is the slow, inexorable making of classical Hinduism.
And this is where the thesis of the digestive power reaches its absolute peak. Classical Hinduism isn't a single, rigid ideology handed down by a single prophet on a mountain.
No, it is a massive, continent-spanning, millennia-long synthesis.
So what does this all mean? The best way I can conceptualize it is like an ancient, infinitely expanding open source network.
I love that.
It never deletes old code. It just keeps absorbing new code from every user, every village, every invader, and integrating it into a larger, more complex system.
That open source metaphor is perfect. Let's look at the source code. First, you have the deepest layer, the pre-Aryan, indigenous, potentially Harappan survivals.
Right. Take Shiva, one of the most powerful and popular deities in the Hindu pantheon today.
There is a famously debated seal from Mohenjo-daro that depicts a horned figure sitting in a yogic posture, surrounded by animals, looking remarkably like an early prototype of Shiva.
Furthermore, the lingam, the abstract phallic cult object deeply associated with Shiva's worship today, has been found in Harappan ruins.
So the worship of Shiva may literally be the oldest surviving, continuously practiced religious cult in the world.
It completely predates the Aryans. You also have the deeply rooted indigenous worship of the mother goddess and the profound reverence for the bull.
The Nandi bull. You can find Nandi shrines in modern Indian villages today, and the bull was even used as a modern political symbol for the Congress Party.
Wait, Reddit, that is a 4,500-year-old symbol still actively shaping modern politics. That's the native code. Now, how does the system absorb the Aryan updates?
Well, the Aryans bring their sky gods, most notably Vishnu, who evolves into the great preserver of the universe.
But the most powerful Aryan contribution wasn't a specific deity, was it? It was the operating language itself, Sanskrit.
Sanskrit becomes the great cultural adhesive. It transcends ethnic and political divisions.
Even down in the Dravidian-speaking South, the Brahmin priests adopted Sanskrit for their rituals. It became the universal language of the sacred, carrying the religion everywhere.
And it carried the philosophy of the Vedas. But here is where the religion takes a massive evolutionary leap.
Right, because we move from simple sacrifice to something much deeper.
Yes. It moves away from the mechanical, transactional ritual of simply throwing butter into a fire so the gods will bring rain. We see a profound inward turn, highlighted by the creation of the Upanishads.
Dating from about 700 BC, these are roughly 250 texts of aphorisms, intense reflections, and dialogues from holy men pointing to the inner, mystical meaning of the religion.
It is a radical philosophical leap. The Upanishads established the psychological and metaphysical concepts that define Indian thought to this day.
They introduced the concept of karma.
The idea that every action in this life, good or bad, generates a reaction that determines human destiny.
And karma is inextricably linked to the immense web of being, the transmigration of souls.
The belief that the soul migrates across castes, or even between the human and animal worlds, in an endless cycle of rebirth determined by your karma.
And the overarching framework holding this all together is the concept of dharma.
Dharma is a famously untranslatable word.
Right, but conceptually it embodies natural law, cosmic justice, and the deep, uncompromising respect for the duties of your specific station in life.
If you are born a warrior, your dharma is to fight. If you are born a merchant, your dharma is to trade. Fulfilling your dharma is how you generate good karma.
And the ultimate goal of all this, it isn't just to be reborn into a slightly better caste. The ultimate goal is moksha liberation
Escaping this endless, exhausting cycle of rebirth entirely.
and achieving the eventual merging of the individual soul with Brahma, the ultimate creative principle of the universe.
So they essentially took the local village deity, rewrote its source code by giving it a Sanskrit name, and integrated it into this massive cosmic server governed by karma and dharma, all managed by the Brahmin priests.
It is an incredibly powerful system,
Yeah.
but it was also a monopoly, and monopolies breed rebellion.
Very true. Not everyone was satisfied with this massive Brahmin-controlled hierarchical system.
Doubt and spiritual dissatisfaction start creeping into the later Vedic hymns. People begin questioning the formalism, the extreme control of the priests, and the entire premise of animal sacrifice.
This friction leads us to the 6th century BC. This is an era of profound philosophical rebellion, asceticism, and brilliant innovation.
We see the emergence of the great innovators, and they provide massive reactions to the established Brahmanical system. The first one to look at is Jainism.
Founded by a 6th century BC teacher, Jainism took the concept of the sanctity of life to its absolute logical extreme.
They preached ahimsa, extreme nonviolence, and respect for all living things.
And there is a fascinating, almost accidental socioeconomic consequence of this deep religious belief.
Because Jain followers could not risk taking any life, even the microscopic insects or worms in the soil, they absolutely could not practice agriculture.
You cannot plow a field without killing worms.
So what happens? Entire communities are essentially forced by their theology to abandon the primary economic activity of the ancient world.
They become merchants, traders, bankers, and artisans instead.
And because commerce often yields higher compounded wealth than subsistence farming, this historical pivot is exactly why the Jain community remains one of the most prominent, prosperous, and influential commercial communities in India today.
You draw a direct, unbroken line from a 6th century BC theological doctrine regarding nonviolence straight to modern demographic wealth.
That is just incredible. But the most important of these innovating systems, the one that would shake the world, was the teaching of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, the enlightened one.
And his backstory is vital to understanding why his message was so revolutionary.
He was born in the foothills of the Himalayas, on the northern edge of the Ganges Plain.
Crucially, this was an area where the orthodox, rigid, Brahmin-heavy caste pattern hadn't fully taken deep root yet.
And even more crucially, he was not a Brahmin. He was a prince of the warrior class, the Kshatriyas.
He grows up with extreme privilege, a comfortable, gentlemanly upbringing, but he finds the material world and the inevitability of suffering, disease, and death deeply unsatisfying.
So he abandons his palace, leaves his family, and seeks an answer. His first attempt to find meaning is to go to the opposite extreme, severe asceticism.
This was a popular alternative at the time. Stepping aside from the material world completely, starving the flesh, trying to force spiritual liberation through physical deprivation.
He did this for 7 years.
But he realizes it's a dead end. Starving yourself just makes you hungry. It doesn't bring enlightenment.
Right, so he pivots away from extreme asceticism and away from the complex rituals of the Brahmins. He discovers a middle way.
A path of teaching an austere ethical doctrine aimed at liberation from suffering through higher states of consciousness.
And the primary mechanism for achieving this higher state was yoga. Now, we often think of yoga today as stretching in a gym, but conceptually it translates roughly as method or technique.
It was about achieving absolute, perfect bodily and mental control.
And what was the purpose of that intense control? To reveal a profound, radical truth. The illusion of the personality, the illusion of the self.
This is perhaps his most radical departure from orthodox thought. The idea that everything in the created world is just flux.
It's just a temporary passage of events. Therefore, our individual identity, our ego, our self, is a complete illusion causing us pain.
We suffer because we cling to things that are temporary, including ourselves.
By following his eightfold path of moral, intellectual, and spiritual improvement, one could overcome this illusion. You could extinguish the flame of desire and attain nirvana.
The word itself implies a blowing out, an extinguishing. It is self-annihilation.
Escaping the endless cycle of rebirth, not by merging with a cosmic god, but by ceasing to be.
The ultimate goal was not to do something to please a god, but to be something in order not to be anything at all.
It was a massive ethical and humanitarian revolution.
And why did this specific teaching catch fire across the continent?
Because it was brilliantly accessible. The Buddha bypassed the Brahmins completely. He didn't attack them, he just made them irrelevant.
He preached in the local vernacular languages, not the elite Sanskrit. And he created the Sangha, communities of monks, giving the movement an institutional, enduring form that could survive his death.
But the most powerful appeal of all was its radical egalitarianism. It offered a vital, dignified path to enlightenment for people who were completely marginalized by the traditional Brahmanical system.
Women could become nuns. Low-caste followers could achieve nirvana.
To the Buddha, your jati, your caste, was utterly irrelevant to your spiritual potential. It was simple, non-ritualistic, and inherently democratic.
Now, ultimately, within India itself, the digestive power of Hinduism won out.
Hinduism proved elastic enough to adopt some of the Buddha's ethical teachings, eventually absorbing Buddhism back into the massive open-source network.
Even turning the Buddha into an avatar of Vishnu. Buddhism slowly dwindled to a minority belief in its homeland.
But it certainly didn't die. Driven out of its home, it became the first true world religion.
It crossed the mountains and the oceans, spreading across all of Asia into China, Japan, Southeast Asia.
Long before Christianity or Islam achieved a similar global reach, it is undoubtedly one of India's greatest cultural exports.
So when we synthesize everything we've pulled from the history today, we see a completely different model of civilizational success.
Exactly. Before the time of the Buddha, ancient India didn't build massive stone pyramids that pierced the sky like the Egyptians.
They came late to literacy compared to the Mesopotamians.
Much of their early achievement, the oral traditions, the philosophies, the social rules, remains physically intangible. You can't put a social norm in a museum case.
Yet what they did create, this incredibly adaptive, layered social system, and a deeply philosophical, all-encompassing set of worldviews, has outlasted every single other ancient creation of the human mind.
The attitudes formed in that walled garden 1,000 years before Christ created a historical trajectory fundamentally different from the great traditions of the West.
Which leaves us with a profound contradiction to consider. Are the walls keeping the civilization safe? Or is the sponge keeping it alive?
That is the ultimate question for anyone looking at India's survival. Does a civilization achieve near immortality by building impenetrable, rigid internal walls?
Like the thousands of microdivisions of the Jati caste system, locking everyone into an exact, unchanging role to prevent societal collapse.
Or does it survive entirely because of its porous, sponge-like ability to absorb every new invader, every new idea, and every new god that crosses its borders?
Can ultimate resilience only come from a society that is willing to endlessly reinvent its own identity, all while claiming it has never changed at all?
It's a staggering paradox.
It really is. It completely shatters the idea of history as a dead thing in a museum case.
We started by talking about looking at history like a medical diagnosis, a clean X-ray. A dead civilization is a dead civilization.
But ancient South Asia proves that the X-ray machine is useless when the patient is not only still walking around, but has absorbed the doctor, the machine, and the hospital into its own biology.
The ancient world is still breathing. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope this exploration has given you a new lens to view the deep currents of human history. Keep questioning the foundations of the systems around you. We'll see you next time.